Imagine an airy workspace that feels like a modern oasis, or a cafe that's cosy and inviting, or a vibrant shopfront that draws customers in. Whatever space you're dreaming up, the IKEA Business Network is here to help you create a better everyday life at work. Join the IKEA Business Network for free and instantly access benefits including a one-on-one with an interior designer, member discounts and perks for your staff and family. So go on, join the IKEA Business Network now at ikea.com.au/business.
Hello and welcome to another episode of First Act, the podcast where we dive into the inspirational origin stories of Australia's most innovative entrepreneurs, business owners and influencers. I'm one of your hosts, Cess Busby, and if there's one thing that I love, it's stories that show how unexpected twists can lead to extraordinary successes.
Just one thing, Cess.
Yes. Oh, well, there's more than one thing, but that's one thing I particularly like.
I'm Adam Bubb, your co-host. Fun fact, I've always been fascinated by the way people can bounce back from failure and realise maybe it wasn't a failure at all. It was something that had to happen, that to lead them on the path to something bigger and better. Today's guest is no stranger to that. Jason T. Smith is someone who has redefined resilience in business. Jason's entrepreneurial journey started with an entirely different goal, to become a medical missionary. But life took him on a detour, and at just 24, he founded what would become Australia's largest physiotherapy network, the Back in Motion Health Group, which he later sold for over 100 million. He's here to tell us how he made that leap and the lessons he's learned along the way. Welcome, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Great to be on your show.
Now, Jason, I really want to start with an overarching theme that's covered in your book, Unlikely. That's the title of your book, because I think a lot of people listening could relate to this. It's the idea of believing in yourself even when others don't. It's something that comes up so much when we talk to founders, is that self-doubt. And should I even keep doing what I'm doing? Is this ridiculous? Should I give up? Was there a specific moment where you had to really lean into that self-belief?
Yeah, because I think when other people doubt you, that's one thing. But when you doubt yourself, I mean, all is lost at that point, right? So believing what you should do, what you could do, are really important parts of the whole narrative. And I think in my story, there were multiple inflection points where I lost belief in what I was doing, maybe even in who I was meant to become. And they become defining moments. I think in your introduction then you said you love hearing the stories of people who bounce back. But the thing is, we can never go back. It's really about how to learn how to bounce forward into whatever the next looks like. So I described 24 years of age as my quarter life crisis. That would have been the most critical moment, really, of where I had lost all belief in myself and had to rediscover purpose, significance, and intentionality.
So before we dive into that quarter life crisis, let's go back a few years to those early days when, you're starting out on your career and you decide that you want to become a medical missionary. Now, I mean, that's not exactly a traditional career choice.
No.
What inspired you to pursue that path? I mean, was helping other people something that was instilled in you in a very early age?
Look, Mum and Dad always had, I think, an outward focus, but it's not like I knew missionaries. It's not like I had been exposed to all the stories that should have ordinarily inspired me. I came from a pretty traditional suburban upbringing, hadn't travelled overseas. I can tell you very clearly, though, where the seed of this came from. And it was a Saturday morning, watching the cartoons while the rest of the household was asleep. And this is the early 80s. And World Vision was starting to put out those adverts for young Ethiopian children who they were looking to get sponsorships around. And I was a 10-year-old boy myself, and I was watching images of these kids, these frail little limbs, these distended bellies, malnourished cows and chickens roaming in the background. And as a little fella, I was so disturbed by these images that I was looking at, and I didn't know how to respond. But the naivete of a young child, I just remember turning to to God and saying, well, I'll help. If there's a job that I could do, I'll help. And I kind of made this little boyhood promise that maybe becoming a doctor and working in the developing world is the obvious thing to do. And from that day forwards, the dream continued to build for no other real reason than that really critical moment.
It's funny when you look back how you can pinpoint the significant moments that led you towards one path rather than another. Like it's you're watching cartoons and then this ad appeared and your whole direction for life took a new focus. I imagine you had different dreams before that.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was in the Navy. His brother was in the Army. My grandfather was in the Air Force. Logic would have suggested that would be a pretty predictable course for me to follow. But you're right, this kind of arrested my attention. And for the next 10 years of my schooling life, no matter who you ask, teachers, friends, family members, what does Jason want to grow up and become? I'm pretty sure if you put them under a heat lamp at 3 o'clock in the morning and interrogated them, they would have all consistently said he wants to grow up, be a doctor, work in the developing world and help the poor, because it had gripped me in a way I probably hadn't even put words around. And, it's funny because I write the book and I tell some of this story. And when my parents read this origin of my passion, even they would say they didn't realize how profound it was for me at that age, because I didn't even know how to explain it, but it had certainly started to impact my identity. There's no doubt about it.
So your career, you start to work as a medical missionary. Where does that take you? What are some of the experiences that you'd had?
Yeah, well, the tragic part of the first epoch of my story, Adam, is that I don't become a doctor. I fail. I don't get the marks I need to go to medical school. So I take the next best option, which is physiotherapy, not knowing a thing about that profession, but using that as my ticket into some short-term trips into Cambodia and eventually into India, loving the experience of working cross-culturally. I marry a girl who's an intensive care nurse. She too wants to give her life to some of these disadvantaged communities. So we figure this is absolutely going to happen. But a couple of things become true. Number one, volunteer work doesn't pay very well. You're dependent on the support of other people. Secondly, even though the need is great, stitching the right opportunities together and finding a way to be meaningful just was a lot harder than it sounded. So I had these early experiences, and then I find myself back in Melbourne, having to pay rent, living the suburban life, trying to work out when we can go back overseas. And I have to do the unthinkable. I have to go get a job in a public hospital and work a mainstream 9 to 5. Can you believe it?
Ew, gross. Who does that?
I know. And so it was this, the evaporation of a dream in some respects, because I could see the passion of what we wanted to do starting to slip through our fingers, because reality bites hard.
Mm. So was that the moment then that made you decide that you needed to change your career path?
I wish I could claim genius. I wish I could claim a moment of decision, Cess. But frankly, I just bombed out in a couple of my first jobs. I just didn't find them fulfilling. I didn't think I was cut out for it. And I ended up just deciding to treat a few friends and family from home to make a little bit of pocket money to, give my contribution to the rent and not feel that Paulina, my wife, had to be the only breadwinner. And we ended up turning our carport into a makeshift consulting room, thinking this is short term, this is temporary. We're just going to do this for a few months and then we're going back overseas. Well, after 3 or 4 months, what was temporary turned into one of the fastest growing physiotherapy practices in the country. And despite me, not because I planned it, not because I even wanted it, I was almost dragged along kicking and screaming in my own success. And I describe myself as an absolute accident. But it happened, and then we had to decide, well, what are we going to do with this? Are we going to make something of it, or are we going to pack it up and go home?
This is once again bringing it back to that age. You were 24 when you founded Back in Motion. When I was 24, I was definitely not focused, and I did not necessarily have my direction sorted out.
Yeah. Well,
What was your mindset like at that age?
I was frustrated. I felt like I had missed my calling. I actually felt deeply distressed. And so when I write about it as being like a quarter life crisis, I'm not being flippant. Actually, it was a real low point because I thought I'm never going to get back overseas. I'm going to get trapped in small business. All the voices around me were that business is hard, you know, most of them fail. It wasn't a positive story. I rang the peak body of physiotherapists, of whom I was a registered member. And I said, can you send me some mentors? Give me some help. They said, look, I'm sorry, but we can't support a young graduate going into business on their own. You need 10 years experience in the real world. So everything around me was really a proclamation of doom. This isn't going to work. Adam, frankly, I felt miserable in my own story, absolutely miserable. And I was a very reluctant participant in what was happening around me. So, not really the exciting beginnings of, an entrepreneurial seizure at all.
But so you've talked about how you were feeling at the time and all of the challenges that you were facing, the physiotherapy society going, what are you even thinking, Sonny? Like, terrible idea. But obviously there must have been something in you that wanted to keep going and thought that actually it was a good idea.
Well, I'll tell you what, Cess, there was a second, thank goodness for this, but there was a second critical moment. But it happened a few years into starting this home-based practice, and I was neck deep, feeling overwhelmed, really on the brink of burning out. And already we were one of the largest practices in the state by accident. But I ran away. I actually took off. I bought a combi van. I shaved my head. I threw my wife in the car, and I said, we're going to try and outrun this business. I gave the keys to another guy, hoping that if it did fail in my absence, inevitably, I could blame someone else. And I was walking along the beach in Darwin. So this is a couple of months into our trip around Australia. I was having a real grumble to myself, and I was kind of negotiating with this God who I thought had said that we were going to be missionaries together, and felt like nothing that I was doing in life was working. And I actually felt really clearly, he said, well, you can go overseas if you want, but it's one or two of you, and I'm not sure how much difference two people can really make. Or you could stop complaining, go home, learn how to run an ethical, scaled business that will become an economic engine that will be able to fund not just the two of you, but hundreds of others. Mm-hmm. And it was like a switch flicked in my brain or in my heart. It's like I went from being this really negative, depressed, ungrateful individual to someone who was now passionate, determined. I'm going to do this on purpose. We drove home. I wrote 80 pages of the ramblings of a madman in an exercise book, which were the beginnings of how we were going to turn this one practice into a national brand, all because I had a reason. I actually thought this was going to be my vehicle to be able to make a difference in the developing world, very different to how I first imagined it, but still to the same end. And that put aviation fuel in my little lawnmower. We took off after that, really.
Yeah. So what were some of the ramblings of the madman then that were...
I mean, it's embarrassing, really, to admit it, but I was starting to write things about building our own technology platform that would revolutionize the industry. I was talking about sponsoring national sporting codes so that we could be, aligned with the best of the best in the country. I talked about taking our brand offshore even. I mean, I hadn't even got out of the carport at this stage, Cess. And I'm starting to dream big. Like I didn't even show my wife all of these musings because I couldn't afford someone to not believe in it. But I felt this conviction. I felt this stirring, this sense that actually anything's possible if you're prepared to have a go. And I kind of buried the 80 pages of the exercise book in the top drawer somewhere once we got going, but always knew it was there and couldn't deny that I had big dreams to try and achieve.
Mm. So you've been on the trip, you've had the revelation, you've written or your manuscript for what you want to do, but then practically what happens next?
Well, you come home and you face the real world again, and you kind of you build a laundry list. You realize you don't have any money, you don't have many supporters. I didn't have any experience, and it was like, wow, okay, dreams are great, but you have got to get practical very quickly. So I started to read every book I could on business. I developed almost an obsession with asking questions of every patient or friend who I knew had any connection to business. I was fortunate to find some wonderful mentors who started to speak into my life. I borrowed, I begged, I didn't steal, but we got as much money together as we could, which at the time was about $250,000, which, I mean, that's a lot of money today, but that was a fortune 20 years ago. And we designed a prototype physiotherapy practice. We shifted out of the small, humble beginnings into this state-of-the-art facility. And it took me 5 years to prove the concept, to really innovate the model of physiotherapy that I wanted to develop. And then in the 3 years after that, we did 12 locations. So, it's slow and cumbersome at the beginning, but then you start to hit your stride as you've proven your concept. Yeah, so that's how it began.
So you effectively you set up the template, which it takes a really long time to get your template right. But then you get to a point where you can kind of create it so that you've got the quality of that template being replicated in multiple places. The standards of customer service, like systems and how you deal, with patients, all those sort of things. Your branding, all of those elements, standardizing, all of that.
Of course, because if you want to scale something, you have to get the efficiencies of a proven model. Otherwise, all you do is replicate pain and dysfunction in your business. And so, I had been drawn to the concept of franchising pretty early in my story, but everybody told me physiotherapy could not be franchised. It's impossible. In fact, it was the dirty F word at conferences and talking with peers, because it's a professional service. It's a personal relationship with your patient. It's not a commoditized product. It's not like you can have 15-year-olds flipping burgers in the back kitchen. But what I realized, to your point, Adam, is actually clinicians, physiotherapists, they are experts at health science, but they don't know how to run a business. So the bit that we can franchise is the recruitment of staff, the training of our practitioners, the branding, the marketing, the financial literacy that goes around that, the technology that gives them the efficiency. If we could build a system that was plug and play, that effectively allowed physios to do what they loved, which was treat patients, and we took the pain out of everything else, which was running the practice, then that element could be franchised. And we could allow the practitioner to still be sovereign and be relational and give patients custom service. That's where the magic kind of found its sweet spot.
Mm. So you went from, like, I think you said 12 initially. Was it something like 700 businesses by the end?
No, we went from one real flagship practice to then 12 in 3 years. And then at our absolute peak success, we were launching one a month. what we ultimately ended up with were 140 locations across Australia and New Zealand with about 700 practitioners.
Wow, that's still very impressive, especially when everyone's been telling you, franchising healthcare, not possible.
Not possible. Yeah. I mean, you're right. And I mean, it's funny because I'd stand up at conferences and we'd share our story and try and invite people into the opportunity. And even when we had 40, 50, 60 locations, which was by far the largest of any network in the Southern Hemisphere, because physio is a small cottage industries, I'd still have people say to me, Sess, I don't think franchising is going to work. And I'd turn around and have to say to them, well, I've got 50 million reasons that suggest it will, because that was the sort of revenue we were bringing in year on year and ended up with over 1 million loyal clients in a population of what, maybe at best 25 million. So I think we had shifted the needle. It's just, it was hard for people to accept. It was hard for people to acknowledge.
Yeah, but as you said, it wasn't like, McDonald's, it wasn't training young kids to flip burgers. It was more about the practice and the mentorship for the business owner, really.
That's right.
So back in motion, you sold it for over $100 million during the pandemic. What led to that decision to sell?
Yeah, so look, 22 years we'd been running the group. We'd started our own foundation. We'd been sending physios on fly-in, fly-out missions into Indigenous communities. We were helping homeless. Like, everything was working. This model was coming true to my dream. And COVID hits, and we had endured the GFC 10 years earlier pretty well, but in the first couple of months of COVID, I put 250 practitioners on furlough. I thought this was the end. We were gonna die out along with the rest of the world. And physiotherapy became one of the 4 reasons you could leave home in lockdown. And everybody started working from home, which meant their ergonomics at the desk weren't right. They weren't exercising like they once used to. And the demand on our services went so high, Adam, that not only did I recruit all those staff back in the second month, I actually was launching new practices during COVID. And we grew 25%. And I'm very sensitive about that because I know that there's people who suffered so desperately during COVID and still to this day have consequences of that. But in our case, and I'm very grateful for this, our business flourished. And so I had a lot of unsolicited offers from hospital groups and big multinational medical companies who wanted to either buy a stake in our group or partner with us. And I had this wave of opportunity that I hadn't even gone looking for. And so when I sat with the board and presented all those options, their very wise counsel was that if this is the sort of interest coming at us without even being on the market, I wonder what you might unearth if you actually were intentional about it. So we engaged PwC to run a silent auction, and we had over 93 bids on our business. And at that point, it seemed inevitable that we were at the top of a bubble, that if we did sell the business, it would fill the war chest with capital to go and do all of that missionary work that we always wanted to do at the beginning. It felt like a once-in-a-career opportunity. And so we transacted.
We'll be back with more from Jason T. Smith after this short break.
Need to refresh your workspace? Want discounts for your business, your staff and your family? The IKEA Business Network is here to help you create a better everyday life at work. Join the IKEA Business Network and instantly access a range of exciting benefits tailored to your unique business needs. It's free to join and you get access to quick fix design tips, member discounts and some amazing perks for your people at over 400 retailers. Join the IKEA Business Network now at ikea.com.au/business.
We're back with Jason T. Smith and we're chatting about his entrepreneurial journey today. Now, I'd like to come back to your biography, Unlikely, which we mentioned at the top of the show. One bit you were talking about in it, you talk about facing corporate espionage. Now, I think that's probably something not many, if any, of our listeners have probably encountered. So can you talk us through that a little bit. What was the experience and how did that impact your business?
Yeah. Oh, look, it was just one of many really tragic stories I tell in the book. You know, as I was writing this thing, it was almost a therapeutic, cathartic process of having to deal with emotions. I moved way too quickly on in the lived experience, but in the writing experience, I had to come back and revisit. And yeah, one of them, I remember going to the desk one morning. We were a fairly prominent national brand at this stage. We had had people try to buy our group at different times that I had said no thank you to. And yet, for some reason, I had an email pop up in my inbox and it was titled confidential. And I ended up reading a memo, a secret memo that had been prepared by a reputable accounting firm to the board of a significant competitor. And it outlined 3 ways to bring Jason and the Back in Motion Health Group down. And it had information in this memo that could only have come from an internal source. And so it was very distressing to me as I thought, wow, am I about to get taken out by the big guys? And obviously put me on notice. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know where to turn. It was a lot of underhanded tactics. And it came at a time where there was already other firestorms on many fronts. And these were part of my story that I wish was someone else's book, but it became part of mine. And we got through it. I mean, you get through these things, but in the moment, you think it's going to sink you. You think it's going to be the end. I had multiple times where I felt like I'm done for, and that was certainly one of them.
How did you manage to stay resilient and keep the business going despite facing this kind of betrayal and sabotage?
I wish I had a beautiful little algorithm on how that works, on what it is that gives you the staying power. I think it's a combination of things. I think having good people in your world is really important, and family essential, but also advocates, mentors who have lived their own war stories and have lived to tell the tale, who remind me that the sun will still rise tomorrow. I think that was really helpful. I think I had this very strong purpose behind our business, like this spiritual belief that I was called to do what I was meant to do, which took me to prayer and took me to readings that would encourage me to not give up the fight. I think that was really helpful. And then I guess at the end of the day, when it's just you and the guy in the mirror, you've got to ask yourself, is it worth it? And for the most time, I felt like the little guy looking back at me was that 10-year-old boy who had seen those adverts saying, well, if you give up now, what's the alternative? How else are you going to help? How are you going to make a difference? And so going forwards felt like the only option. And if someone took me out, well, they'll take me out, but I'm going to die trying.
So you're talking about moving forwards and keeping on trying, like you've been in business and entrepreneurship for decades now. What is it that kind of keeps you coming back, that keeps you trying, that you've had multiple businesses, you've built and sold kind of empires, like what keeps you coming back for more?
I think it's this sense that we are here on purpose. I don't want to live by accident. I don't want to default to the status quo. I feel like we all have a contribution to make, and we're gifted in different ways. And I think I'm on this continuous process of trying to do an inventory on what am I good at? What am I meant to be doing? And it's never a one-time question. You kind of have to revisit this periodically over your life. And when I find that there's certain things I'm good at and therefore I can contribute in meaningful ways, it takes me back to the well. Okay, let's start a new initiative. Let's seek out how we can have impact and some sort of enduring influence. I've recently, since selling the business, become the chair of a initiative called Half Time. And Half Time is helping CEOs and entrepreneurs transition from the success of their enterprise to the significance of having impact in the world beyond them. And I just keep meeting people who are on the same journey that I am, and it's very rewarding to hear how we can find a way to link what we're good at with how it helps others. It's this idea that our fruit might grow on other people's trees, and it's very motivational.
Hmm. So you spoke a bit about success there, but what about failure? Obviously, in some ways, you wouldn't be where you are now if you hadn't have failed your attempts to be a doctor and couldn't become the medical missionary that you wanted to be, and then your career took a different path. Like, how do you view failure now? What advice would you give to entrepreneurs or anyone really about taking risks and embracing failure?
Yeah, it's such a good observation. I think success is overrated. I think everyone likes the headlines. The publisher wants to see $100 million on the front cover of my book, but actually, I got things more wrong than I ever got them right. That I'm just this continual um, repeating pattern of failure who occasionally has moments of success, to be fair. So I would say to people that let's be honest with ourselves. Actually, we learn so much more from our failure. We don't learn a lot from success. When we get it right, we celebrate, we high five. The view at the top of the mountain is amazing, but it's momentary. It's very rare that we take stock of those situations and we learn from it. But man, when we fail at things, gee, does it send you back to doing the hard work on yourself and seeking the input of others and working out how to do it differently. That's where innovation's born from. That's where the disruptors come from. They come from failure. And so I say embrace the failure, actually. Failure is the ticket to play. And any entrepreneur who's left their tiny little dent in the world, I think would agree with me. We are just consecutive failures who don't give up. So let's just reframe the word. Let's just talk about failure as really being learning and development, personal growth. It's progressive. It's progressive evolution of the idea. So I kind of have learned to accept that.
Yeah, success really is only the tip of the iceberg. That does tie in with what my next question is, which is about your Iceberg Leadership Institute, because leadership is really what you're doing so much of in that. What are those core principles you think every entrepreneur should keep in mind as they grow their businesses?
Yeah, I think everyone's got leadership capacity. For some reason, have been led to believe at a societal level that leadership is for the elite few at the top. And I think that's a tragedy. At the very least, we should all lead ourselves. But we also have an opportunity to lead peers and make an influence in not necessarily that world, but in our world. And so we all have a context in which we can lead. So for 15 years, I've been the principal of the Iceberg Leadership Institute. We've graduated nearly 2,000 people through that, both experienced and emerging leaders. And it's all about equipping them with the personal attributes to help them in business or in social enterprise or in some other organizational context to recognize that it is a learnable skill. It's not like there are just born leaders and the unlucky majority. No. Leadership can be taught, it can be learned. They are personal attributes, and they feed into this conversation, Cess, that you asked about resilience and how you handle failure and how you cast vision and how you gather people around you. Because if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go with people, and that requires leadership.
We've talked about embracing failure and kind of reframing failure, but what about mistakes? Are there some common mistakes that maybe entrepreneurs might make that could be avoidable? And if they had a bit of mentoring, they wouldn't need to go through that pain.
Yeah. I mean, the classic entrepreneur is big on ideas and vision and ambition, but very weak on structure and discipline. and follow through. So one of the mistakes I think I made very often in my early years was I was looking for the shortcuts. I was trying to do it all on the smell of an oily rag. I would defer the substance of putting systems in place to when I was ready. Of course, you never have time or capacity for that stuff, so you end up building a house of cards. So I think one of the things that entrepreneurs can and should learn early is the value of structure and discipline, not instead of the idea, but to kind of almost build an alloy with it. The other big mistake I embarrassingly made so many times was to misunderstand the power of relationships. People are just so crucial. And because when I'm under pressure, I'm far more task driven than I am people focused. It means when I'm at my worst, I don't understand the power of relationship. And I think, again, entrepreneurs, we sometimes miss that. And so they would be the two thematics that run through my book as I kind of admit my mistakes. There's plenty more, but they would be two big ones, I think.
You've talked a lot about maintaining a balance between business success and social responsibility and having that real sense of purpose. And I think a lot of people listening can relate to that they want to make an impact. That's probably why they're listening, because they're thinking, how can I make a bigger impact in what I'm doing every day? How do you always ensure that your ventures are always going to have that end goal of being able to have a positive social impact?
Look, it's a cliche, but it's only a cliche because it's true. And that is, you've got to start with the end in mind. If you launch opportunities without clarity over how the mechanics of this opportunity are going to feed into your ultimate end, then there is no doubt you are going to get lost in the forest, because every day presents distractions, setbacks, hardships that can dissuade you from having that ultimate impact. So for me, I think it was always knowing from the very beginning that even if we sold this business one day, as one example, it wasn't our money to then spend, that Paulina and I were just responsible stewards, the trustees, that we wanted to make sure that money went to the purposes that we started this business for in the first place. And it's just one example, but I think having a few things like that you tether yourself to ensures that you don't get sucked into the vortex of the busyness of running your own business, which can then just totally overwhelm you.
So you talked about not getting sucked into the vortex. So looking back at your entrepreneurial journey, is there something specific that kind of tethered you, that kept you on your right path?
Well, frankly, it was the medical missionary stuff, really. That's what tethered me. It's what I always felt I was destined to do. It didn't work out how I planned. I ended up in the marketplace as a bit of a kind of unlikely entrepreneur. But what kept me sane and what kept me aligned was that I felt like I still was a missionary, just not the way I expected. So we were generating surplus funds. We were having an impact in the lives of patients. My workforce became a cohort of people that we wanted to make a difference in their lives. And we started to do all sorts of social programs with and for our workforce. And so in a strange, crazy sort of way, I kind of made my peace with the fact halfway through the journey that I am a medical missionary, but just not how traditionally you might think of one. And that tethering is to that idea, that belief, that ambition really was probably the most important bit.
From all of your businesses, is there something particularly that you found rewarding within the journey?
I think people have always been my greatest hardship and also my greatest reward. So, it's a double-edged sword. I've had betrayals, I've had legal entanglements, I've had very close friends turn on me in the cut and thrust of business, which is painful. But on the other side, Seth, I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of rewarding experiences with people. I've been at their marriages, the christenings of their children. Sadly, I've had to attend some of their funerals, but I've been at those critical moments in life with other people who have been journeymen. You know, they've been contributors to the story of Back in Motion and other businesses I've started. And I just feel grateful for that. I feel like that is rewarding in itself. And then when we finally get the chance to take some of our kids, we've raised 4 children in our home, and when I get the chance to take them overseas and visit projects and communities that we've been able to invest money and time into and help them appreciate this is what the business has afforded us to do, I mean, that is rewarding in words I can't explain.
A lot of what you've talked about in today's podcast is what is covered in your book, Unlikely. You've written 3 books, though. So you've done quite a lot. What has inspired you to put pen to paper here? Were these ramblings of a madman this time?
Yeah.
And what do you hope readers will gain from that story?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fun writing books, but it's not fun publishing books. It is so much work getting these things edited and then promoted and out into the readership. But the first 2 books, one was on leadership and one was on healthcare. So very much my core trade. You know, they were books to which I could speak a technical expertise into. But this last one, Adam, it's more of a memoir. It's the personal story. It's, you know, I give extracts from my journal. I share stuff that I've never told anyone outside my family before. So it's scary. It terrorizes me because once the book's out, there's no pulling it back. But I write it because I think the entrepreneurial journey it's not a taboo subject. People like the headlines. They like the highlights. They like to admit a little bit of failure and a little bit of success. But very rarely do we hear the true personal grit that we go through. And I initially wrote it for the kids, for my children, but realised a little while into it, maybe there's a wider audience to understand that actually we're normal. If you have a hard time in getting a brand started, that is entirely normal. And hopefully it encourages people to take more risks and back themselves.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm afraid that's pretty much all we've got time for. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your incredible journey with us. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show with us.
I'm thankful for the opportunity.
Jason, thank you so much. I've learned so much just listening to you, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot out of your book, Unlikely, in reference to you being the unlikely entrepreneur. Thank you for tuning into First Act, and be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, 5 stars, 4.5 if you feel like we could have done something better. And join us next time for more inspiring conversations with Australia's most innovative entrepreneurs. See you next time.